Hi, I'm Erin McKenney, and this is a very brief summary of our paper published in the journal Autism, titled Satisfaction Social Connectedness is Associated with Depression and Anxiety Symptoms in Neurodiverse First Semester College Students. This paper is broadly part of our 2M2X project, which there's also a short video introducing that project and other videos on other findings from that project if you're interested. This paper really focused on the role of social satisfaction or dissatisfaction in predicting mood symptoms during the sensitive time period of the transition to college. So we had students who were entering their first semester at a university, both students who identified as autistic as well as students who did not. And we followed their weeks during the semester to look at various predictors of depression and anxiety, and this paper especially looking at social satisfaction. When we looked at the relationship between satisfaction with social connectedness and depression and anxiety symptoms, we found a mix of sort of broader predictive relationships and synchronous relationships. So what I mean by that is when we controlled for baseline depression scores, we did find that general tendencies towards satisfaction with social connectedness, as measured via a larger survey prior to the semester, was predictive of depression ratings throughout the rest of the semester. We also saw a synchronous relationship. So within one time point, if I asked someone on one survey, in the middle of the semester, for example, how satisfied they are with their social situations and what their sadness rating is, those were also correlated with one another. We also saw that being less socially satisfied was somewhat related to anxiety symptoms, but this relationship was only synchronously, so only within a time point, and there wasn't that type of predictive relationship when it came to anxiety. When we look at the role of autism in this, we see that these relationships did not change by levels of autistic traits. So what I mean by that is social dissatisfaction was related to depression and anxiety in generally the same way for folks, regardless of whether or not they were autistic or regardless of level of autistic traits. There were some other differences related to autism though. So aligning with a lot of prior work, autistic folks tended to have higher ratings of depression and anxiety. We also saw that baseline in that initial survey, folks with higher autistic traits tended to have lower social satisfaction. Unexpectedly, however, folks with higher autistic traits tended to have more social satisfaction on the short surveys throughout the rest of the semester. That is really interesting and contrary to our hypotheses and contrary to some of the sort of other literature indicating concerns with social dissatisfaction and social difficulties in autistic people. This could be explained by a lot of different things. It's possible, for example, that this transition to college might be a really positive influence socially for autistic students in particular. So while these students may have come in not really having as much of a sense of community or as much social support, perhaps college really was a great fit for them socially. They were able to meet more communities of like-minded people and maybe find more neurodiversity affirming spaces, for example. It's also possible that this is a difference that's related to kind of relative comparison. So autistic students may have been less socially satisfied at baseline, and because of that, when they got some sense of community, they felt way more socially satisfied, even by perhaps small changes in level of social engagement, versus maybe some of the non-autistic students were a little bit more level in their satisfaction and less optimistic when these changes did occur. We really don't know what the cause of this is, but it is interesting and I think somewhat hopeful for the role that college could play in building social support for some of these neurodivergent students. We also looked for moderations by social motivation, or how much people want social interaction. Generally, these relationships were consistent across levels of social motivation at baseline, but there was one significant moderation effect. So we saw that the negative relationship between baseline social satisfaction and anxiety was the strongest for participants who had more social motivation. That was our one significant difference in that social motivation category. Overall, our results highlight that social connectedness has some impact on mental health, regardless of autism status. Sometimes there are myths that autistic people don't want social connection or don't benefit from friendships, and our evidence does not suggest that that's the case. And I think that finding these common mechanisms across neurotypes can also be really empowering when we talk about prevention and intervention efforts. We know that clinicians sometimes are uncertain or not confident in their skills and abilities to work with autistic clients. So I think one message I'd like people to take away from this type of literature is that the causes of depression are very common across neurotypes. And that means that we understand a lot about depression and anxiety and what causes it. And to an extent, that also means we have some insight on how to intervene, or how potentially to intervene at least. So I hope that this type of literature can continue to encourage clinicians that they know more than they think they do about working with this population. We can adapt already existing methodologies to be neurodiversity affirming and client-centered as we would with any client. But I hope that we'll continue to support our autistic students and clients in finding satisfying friendships that work for them and meet their needs.